President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Well, now Dr. Alan Mendoza, the founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, joins us now. Firstly, Dr. Alan Mendoza, what did you make of the speech by the Ukrainian president?
Well, I think it was a very strong speech. I mean, he knew his audience well. He had the Churchillian rhetoric ready, but it was a great symbol as well, basically. I mean, there was the entire House of Commons sitting there with their headphones on with their Ukrainian flag, kind of pins. It was a very strong message both ways. Firstly, his messaging to the UK. Secondly, of course, our, if you like, rapt attention, the interest level, and of course the reaction to that, at least initially, entirely positive. So I think it couldn't have gone better from the perspective of Zelenskyy, and of course, indeed, from the perspective of where Britain is today on the Ukraine crisis.
But Dr. Mendoza, will it change anything? I mean, we've still ruled out a no-fly zone, which Volodymyr Zelenskyy would like, and we've now got the Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. Do you think today? Do you think it was actually going to change anything?
I hate to say it, but no. The UK government has sort of established its lines so far. It is continuing to obviously work on the diplomatic isolation of Russia, on the financial isolation of Russia. We are seeing, kind of new measures being brought in almost daily on that score. But frustratingly, we're not seeing, of course, any action really to help tip the military balance towards the Ukrainians. And the latest, of course, is that the US administration has essentially vetoed the Polish plan to send MiGs over to surplus MiGs over to Ukraine. And let's be realistic, we can do all we can from the outside to try and do medium-term damage to the Russian aggression that's happened. But the Ukrainians need help now in order to address that balance on the ground. If they don't get it, ultimately, Putin shows no signs of stopping. And I fear we will see much more death and destruction because he will just be allowed to continue.
Well, the economic sanctions are certainly beginning to bite, not just in Russia, but also in the UK. We've been discussing the cost of living crisis and the impact on the sanctions that might have here. I mean, do you worry that, as this seeps in further, these sanctions, and it affects the global economy and nations within the Western societies themselves, that there's going to be less resolve to actually continue pushing against Russia?
It's certainly possible, but I hope that two things might happen. Firstly, of course, that people realise, as they have to this point, that our freedoms are precious and require active intervention on our part to stop them, and that sometimes that intervention is not cost-free. So I think people genuinely understand, of course, that this is a direct challenge to us, what Vladimir Putin has done in Ukraine, that we can't just sit back and allow him to get away with it. And unfortunately, that may have some economic cost attached to it, but it's still the right thing to do. But secondly, it's entirely possible, of course, that the government, seeing it has managed to dramatically intervene in markets for the last 2 years, might decide to do something collectively in the West. We ought to be looking at some way we can defray this huge energy cost rise, which we know is being sparked by this conflict, which we know is being sparked by Vladimir Putin's actions, and which we can almost certainly do something economically about, should we be so minded to do so.
Do you think actually there's any chance of there being too much idolization of Zelenskyy? Do you think there's any chance of that, or do you think actually that he's thoroughly deserving of all of this adulation?
Oh no, he's thoroughly deserving of it. I mean, this was somebody who was widely deemed in Ukraine not to be up to the job before the conflict. I mean, you saw his opinion poll ratings, they were pretty dismal. People didn't think he had a good handle on issues, and this has become his moment. He has single-handedly channeled, if you like, the spirit of Ukraine through him, which is exactly what you want from your wartime leader. And I think, Zelenskyy is absolutely deserving of the praise that he's received. But of course, he's not interested in praise. He's interested in saving his country from Russia. And that is ultimately how he will judge his success, not whether he's received some plaudits from us for his speeches.
Well, isn't that an important point, Dr. Mendoza, that in the kind of idealization and this narrative building that has formed, justifiably so, in relation to defending Ukraine, that we may miss the reality of the conflict, which is, bloodshed and violence, and Russia is continuing to encroach on Ukrainian territory towards Kiev right now. And if we are saying that, we admire Zelenskyy, but we are not necessarily willing to back him as much as he may demand militarily, then isn't there a problem there? Are we really willing to do what he asks in order to defend his country?
Well, I think there's two things in this. Firstly, we are, kind of loudly and proudly saying Putin must fail, Putin must fail. Well, if you really believe Putin must fail, you have to do everything in your power, not 90% of things, but 100% of things to make that happen. However, that doesn't necessarily mean giving Zelenskyy what he would like. I mean, he would no doubt like to have our armies on the ground, fighting the war with him. That's never going to happen because ultimately, despite our admiration for what he's doing, there are practical reasons why it can't happen. But is there a gap between those two positions? Is there something that, are there areas that we can do much more in? The answer is definitely yes. We can supply more advanced weaponry to Ukraine. We can enforce a no-fly zone in at least part of the country where the Russians are not, and therefore there is no danger of running into them in the way that people fear should it be enacted across the whole country. Are we therefore at the full extent of what we're doing, short of doing what he wants? The answer is no. So there is clearly still space for us to progress in order to ensure that Putin must indeed fail.
Indeed. All right, Dr. Mendoza, thank you very, very much. The founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, who was discussing, of course, the very latest there from Ukraine, how we can combat those extremism that's going on over there in the war, etc., etc., etc. Right, so...